Okay, we are live. I'm really sorry about that. We had an issue. I'm not sure what happened, but that stream ended. But we are so excited because we still have so much amazing stream. And yes, we are back. And we are going to be joined by Norman Finkelstein later. But first, we are joined by a guest we're very excited about, Mohammed Hisam. He's an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement and currently serves as Director of Advocacy and Education for the Palestinian American Cultural Center of Houston. So, Mohammed, without any further ado, please come to this virtual stage. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to ask you what I asked kind of Miko before. I asked Miko to explain his relationship to this situation, to what's happening in Gaza, his family's relationship to Palestine. What's your family's relationship to Palestine?
So yeah, I'm both my parents are Palestinian, and obviously I'm Palestinian. My father's side of the family were from West Jerusalem, and they were expelled in 1948 as part of the Nakba, as part of the founding of the state of Israel, and they ended up going to Kuwait and living there for multiple decades before they eventually immigrated to the United States. My mother was born and raised in Jerusalem, at the eastern part of the city, and she was born in 1961 prior to the occupation and eventual annexation of Jerusalem by Israel, and her entire family continues to live there. So my whole family on my mother's side lives in Jerusalem. My dad has one uncle, but my dad's family is just like many Palestinians. His family scattered across the world, in the region, Germany, Australia, Canada, the US. His family basically live in what we call a state of exile.
Okay. And what kind of organizing are you doing right now around what's happening? And I'm sorry, by the way, for what happened to your family. Can you share what kind of organizing you're doing around this issue right now?
Yeah. So right now, I think our goal is to organize protests to break through the wall of propaganda that we're seeing across U.S. and Western media broadly. PYM, Palestinian Youth Movement, as an organization, we have chapters across 14 cities in North America. We're also present in Britain. And what we've noticed is obviously what we consider a project of manufacturing consent for a genocide in Gaza. That's what we're witnessing on the political level with the political class, from Biden, his speech today, to the media class all throughout the US and the West broadly. And so these protests are meant to signal the grassroots voice on this issue. And we're seeing diverse populations, Black people, Latinos, Arabs, Muslim, Jews, all throughout North America mobilizing in the streets because this voice, we're not given a platform to sort of combat this. Or whenever we are given a platform, it's always framed in a sense of the first question is, do you condemn, right?
Yeah.
Which is a question that's never asked of representatives of the state of Israel, for example, despite them coming on to, they're never asked, do you condemn the massacre of Palestinian children within Gaza? And so our goal as the PYM is to organize protests and actions throughout. I mean, in off periods, quote unquote, off periods or lulls, we're still organizing protests. We did this when Hawara was, when a pogrom was carried out against Hawara. We did this when Shireen Abu Akleh was assassinated by the IDF. We did this in May of 21. So we're regularly organizing actions, but we also do educational events. And, you know, in the US, and Miko would be able to speak to this as well, and I'm sure he's mentioned this, there's the Palestinian and Arab communities broadly have a sense of fear, you know, and you'll see this moment actually shows you why, right? First of all, there's an implication that Arabs and Muslims are rapists, are cutting off babies' heads. And the implication is that our communities, if they're not doing that in Palestine, they're supportive of that, okay? And so imagine a context in which you're being accused of being supportive of essentially barbaric acts, right? Acts that haven't taken place or occurred. They're propaganda they're lies and fabricated by, Israeli media personalities. But in any case, our goal as the PYM is to create a sense of courageousness amongst our communities, right? That regardless of this moment, we have to weather this storm. And at the end of it, we're only going to be able to shift the narrative if we confront it, if we actually face off. Because there's this tendency, especially amongst immigrant communities, where fear of deportation, they don't really understand the criminal justice system or their legal rights within this country, to say, let's go into our shell. Let's keep our heads down, because this isn't the moment for it, okay? Especially when you have, basically, they're veiled threats when they say we're going to bring in the FBI and law enforcement to investigate to ensure there aren't attacks. Well, the people whose doors are being knocked on are people like me, people like our community. So there's a veiled threat. There's a manufacturing of consent around repression of the Arab, Muslim, Palestinian communities. There's a manufacturing consent of the siege mentality and fear mongering created and projected onto the Jewish community. That Jewish people are not safe here, that they're under threat from their Arab and Muslim neighbors. And there's a manufacturing of consent for a genocide in Gaza. This is a three-pronged strategy that takes place through platforms in the DC and through CNN, MSNBC, Fox. So for us, PYM, that's our goal right now, is to counter that. We're on a defensive, but we're also on an offensive. It's not, the tide is turned. Obviously, it's not, the grassroots does not match the grass top, nor does it match the actual political elites. But we're not, just like our people are brave in Palestine, we have to be brave here, regardless of repression and regardless of the threats that we face from all of these different sources.
And I just wanted to return to the question of kind of what your family experiences, because I know that you were telling me before that some of your family members in Palestine don't feel safe.
Right.
Can you explain why? Because I just want people to get the sense of the reality over there.
Right. So in Jerusalem, for the Palestinians that live in Jerusalem, the vast majority of them are just residents. Okay. They do not have Israeli citizenship. So what that means is you live in the city, you pay taxes, but you're not allowed to vote, and you're not permanently there. Okay. And so that residency can be revoked at any point in time. And in fact, the state of Israel has a law that applies only to Palestinians, right? And that law is, if Palestinians who are from Jerusalem, who have residency cards, right, residency ID cards, spend more than 6 months outside of Jerusalem, whether that's spending time in the West Bank or spending time in the US, that residency card is revoked, okay? So that means the city of their birth, where their family lives, the vast majority of their life they may have lived there, they're not allowed to live there anymore. So my mom is that. My mom's residency card was revoked because they found out she had an American passport. And they said, because the idea is we have to empty these lands of Palestinian Arabs, right? And so that's their opportunity. So they codified it. Now, this doesn't apply to Jewish people in Jerusalem, and it actually, in fact, doesn't apply to Jewish people outside of Palestine. It means that, someone like yourself, for example, can go and immigrate to Jerusalem today.
Become a citizen,
you can immigrate to Jerusalem today and get citizenship and live where my mom was born, and my mom can't, even though she was born and raised there, even though she lived there before Israel ever occupied it, right? And this is why we call it a dual system of apartheid. So there's that backdrop, first of all. The second thing is, Jerusalem is under military occupation administered by the Israeli police, okay? And that means the lives of Palestinians are controlled. Palestinians either live in Palestinian neighborhoods, right, where it's predominantly Palestinian and they're subject to Israeli control, right? And that means they can be cordoned off, they can be closed off. There's a major refugee camp, it's called Shafat in Jerusalem, that's constantly raided and under siege. Or they live in mixed neighborhoods where there is heavy police presence, and you can even see, it's a settler dynamic where sort of the most rabid wings of Israeli society are effectively trying to encroach on Palestinian neighborhoods. And the reason is make their lives miserable. And so now Palestinians in Jerusalem are not going out of their homes. And the reason is because they're afraid afraid of the settlers that are present within Jerusalem, the ones that spit on you, the ones that attack you, under the supervision of the Israeli police. So that's the context for Palestinians in Jerusalem. They're obviously very fearful. But at the end of the day, I think it's one of those things where if the moment is right for it, they will go out into the streets. But right now, it's a state of fear. It is.
And what can people who want to support the cause, what can we do?
Right. So I think the most important thing is to support the grassroots organizations within your city, right? The progressive forces within the context that do take firm stances on Palestine, to support them. Because here's the thing, there's this tendency, especially amongst the progressive wing of American movements, to jump ship the moment it gets too hot, right? And we've seen that already. Congressmen have jumped shipped, right? People who are often viewed as pro-Palestine are jumping ship.
Right. People
right?
people condemned, like AOC condemned the All Out for Palestine.
Which was in fact organized by the PYM. It wasn't organized by the DSA.
Oh, wow.
Right? Now, the DSA, because it's an opportunity for them to take a shot at the DSA, they did it, right? Because people are scoring points.
Right.
People like Richie Torres, people like the governor of the state of New York, all of these people, Mayor Adams, all of these people are looking, they're looking for an opportunity to score points and to attack the progressive wing of our society, not because they stand on Palestine, but truthfully because of their opportunity to attack them for being progressive.
Right.
Right. And this is, I think, like the progressive movement needs to understand that Palestinian issue is a canary in a coal mine. Okay. The moment it goes down, that means they're circling you. Right. They're circling you for whether it's because you support Medicare for all, whether it's because you support public education, whatever issues that are actually progressive, Palestine is their vehicle to attack you. Okay. And you know someone is principled and not willing to sell out people if they stand firm on Palestine. Because if you can catch heat on Palestine and weather it, you can catch heat on fossil fuels, you can catch heat on supporting unions in their strike, you can catch heat in supporting Medicare for all. If you're willing to weather it then, you're willing to weather it in all issues. And so, I think supporting grassroots movements and progressive movements that are firm on Palestine, groups like the PYM, local Palestine groups, student movements on campus, Students for Justice in Palestine that are all over campuses across the US, over 200 chapters. These groups are under constant attack. There's a reason, for example, like, I think, Katie, you asked me, like, do you have a Twitter handle? And I do have a Twitter, but I no longer have a Twitter. And the reason is because I've been harassed nonstop by groups like Canary Mission. Canary Mission, which, I'll be forward, Hisam is my middle name. And the reason is because the amount of pressure we face.
So it's not your last name.
It's not my last name because people might call my workplace, right? And so here's the thing. On my Canary Mission, Can you explain what
Canary Mission is for people who don't know?
So Canary Mission is I think it's an Adelson-funded initiative, truthfully. I can't tell you because they guard their funding. Sheldon Adelson, right?
All right.
It's a project. Sorry. Yeah. RIP indeed. Well, it's an Adelson-funded project that essentially is a blacklist of Palestinian, Arab, and just pro-Palestine activists all over campuses. Okay, professors, media personalities, students, right? And the idea is to blacklist them and to basically track their lives. And for example, my profile is multiple pages long. My profile has my wedding date on, who I got married to.
Oh, great. So she can get harassed too, or he can.
And she's on Canary Mission too. So they've linked our profiles. My wife and me are now on Canary Mission, and then they've identified that we've married. It tells you where my workplace is. It follows every development in my life. Sometimes if I don't remember what I've done in terms of my activism career, I just go to the Canary Mission and it's right there present for me because they've chronicled it all. Okay. And they accuse you of being anti-Semitic, of supporting terrorism, of being anti-American, all of that sort of accusations you can imagine. So that's Canary Mission. And I mean, it's not like at this point in time, I've already it's not like I'm going to erase what they have, but I'm just also tired of being harassed. I'm not going to stop my work. I prioritize different avenues of work. I'm not on social media as much. I'm more involved with my community, organizing on a grassroots level. But I used to be very present within social media, but now it's, for me, it's balancing. Do I want to spend my energy responding to vitriol and harassment, or do I want to spend my energy organizing within my community? And I've chosen the latter.
And what was the protests, the All Out for Palestine? What were those protests about? Because you have a lot of people, of course, saying that they were a celebration of violence. I mean,
Right.
you know, I almost feel bad even asking you about that because it's so ridiculous. But given, you know, I want to give you the chance, given how pervasive those headlines are and how it clearly worked, either people like AOC either believed it naively or saw through it, but for political reasons, pretended not to.
Right. So the All Out for Palestine protest is about demonstrating that there is still support for Palestinians, right? As they weather one of the cruelest bombardment campaigns. We're talking about almost 700 Palestinians killed over the duration of 2 days, you know? And so for us, it was to signal to the rest of the world and to our communities here that the grassroots, the diverse communities of these different cities, the progressive movements, support Palestine. And support Palestine because here's the thing. As far as the attacks go, there's a bunch of different things that have happened during these last attacks in Israel. But the most fundamental and most important thing for us as Palestinians is that Palestinians broke out of Gaza. Okay? That alone is something that's monumental for us. Why? Because it's a prison break. You know what I mean? When you have people who are completely trapped, they're besieged, they're blockaded, land, air, and sea, food, medicine, construction material, everything that goes in and out is controlled. Okay? When those people, some of them have never lived outside or visited outside of Gaza. They've not seen the rest of Palestine. They've not seen the coast of what is called modern day Israel, where they're from. Because 70% of the Gazan population, the people who are living in the Gaza Strip, are not from Gaza. They're from the north of Palestine. They're from Haifa and Akka and Tabariya and all of these different cities that now either have very tiny Arab populations or no Arab populations at all. So these people fled south, okay? And they ended up there. And these people have never seen it for generations, the rest of Palestine. And so it was a prison break. So for us as Palestinians, this is important. Now, getting into the weeds of what transpired afterwards in the propaganda that's been spread, it's almost impossible to parse through. But at the end of the day, we support the right of our people to break out of prison. Okay? The right of our people to break out of a concentration camp, to revolt against military rule. That's fundamental. And what people don't understand is that in these instances, and I think Miko was talking about it, colonial situations create violence, period. The situation itself is violent, right? In order to put a fence around the people, in order to keep them in that fence, in order to deny them their food, medicine, you have to inflict a severe degree of violence. And to prevent them from revolting, you have to inflict a severe degree of violence. You have to throw them in cages. You have to torture them. You have to drop bombs on them regularly. And so the situation for Palestinians, and this is what is crazy, and you hear this, obviously the cameras turned on when that violence touched Israeli lives, right? But this violence is ever present for Palestinians, ever present. Okay? If it's not the actual violence, it's the threat of violence. Okay? And so our protest is also a part of that, is recognizing that our people revolting is something that is honorable. Okay? That's not to say we're going to get into it's not about a celebration of a specific act or the consequences. It's the cry for freedom that is reflected in the idea of breaking a fence with a bulldozer that is used to destroy your home, right? That's the image that we see, okay? And so these are why we organize these protests.
Yeah, well, that's makes a lot of sense. Is there anything else that you think is important for people to know about, to hear about? Anything you want to say in response to the media's portrayal of this?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of I gestured at this. What is important right now, especially for your audience and for people like you, is we have to counter this narrative, because what is being generated right now is, and to use Noam Chomsky, is a manufacturing of consent for genocide.
Right.
We had Major Mike, I think his name is Mike Lyons. He was on CNN. He was asked by Anderson Cooper, who's like choking up when talking about what's happened to Israelis. He was asked, what is it going to take, a ground invasion? What would that look like? He's like, the collateral damage would be thousands, tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. And there was no pushback, no questioning. He said, this is the amount of collateral damage we have not seen since World War II, which the world came together after and said, this sort of violence can never be repeated. And they established a list of laws and saying, these are laws we must abide by in contexts of war to ensure that people don't die at this level again. Okay? It's being predicted and encouraged by someone on CNN, the so-called liberal, human rights oriented platform, right? Which is, I say that tongue in cheek, but like, this is the platform that's at like, imagine a Palestinian or whoever, someone who's supporting the Palestinians say, oh, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people in Israel will die.
Right.
And that's collateral damage. And, they got to do what they got to do. Like, how that feels to hear that? It's terrifying. It really is terrifying to hear, and especially the frenzy across the media, right? The rape stories, 40 babies being beheaded. You know what I mean? What is that meant to gin up? That there is no bounds for the response that must be inflicted on the babies in Gaza.
Yeah.
Right? So if you decapitate their heads, it's proportional. That's what's being generated. And to have and all of these politicians, all of these media figures, all of these corporations issuing these statements, right? That's what's happening. Is the same form of consent that was manufactured around Ukraine. I remember when the Ukraine stuff happened, when the Russian war broke out, I was like, man, I don't remember in my life ever seeing a propaganda campaign being waged in the way. You'd be driving down the streets of Texas highway and you're seeing Ukraine flags, and corporations would literally say, we'll match our employees' donations to go to military supplies in Ukraine. Okay. I remember saying to myself, wow, I don't remember the last time a campaign of manufacturing consent occurred around a war since the war in Iraq. And I even thought at that moment that maybe this was crazier. Maybe it was more frenzied than the war in Iraq. But obviously I was much younger, the post 9/11 era. But anyways, it feels very reminiscent what's happening now, right? To say, and you could see like the vilification of Russians is similar to, that, you can totally, like Russians as people, Russian flag, all of that. They're also now, there's no off limits when it comes to those. Like you can attack these people as those people.
Right. It's not about the government. It's about the people. Right. Yeah.
Right. But what's different here is, unlike Russia, who is a military and is a superpower, the Palestinians are defenseless, caged people. Okay. So you're about to massacre. They're in the process of massacring Palestinians. But I will tell you this, and this is why Palestinians, when you want to say why do Palestinians turn to armed resistance? And I want to talk about resistance, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
So for Palestinians, this is an existential situation. Okay. Like, it's not as though we need, because, there's this often this, what happens among Zionists is like, let us define Zionism. What is Zionism? They say, oh, Zionism is the self-determination of Jewish people and their historic homeland, right? But that's not Zionism. That's a definition of Zionism that's in the abstract, that is not grounded in the historical record and the present reality. We know what Zionism is. Palestinians do. Zionism for Palestinians is mass expulsion. It's massacres. It's siege. It's occupation. It's war. It's deprivation of rights, deprivation of land, deprivation of resources, and deprivation of our a fulfilling life. That's what Zionism is for us. We know what Zionism is. We know what it's entailed for our people, for our ancestors. We know what it means to us. And we know that its confrontation with us as a people is existential. There's a land here and the people present. There's another people who want that land without the people. It's pretty simple. And what's crazy is the West Bank, for example, for like religious Zionists, right-wing Zionists, actually Judea Samaria, what they call Judea Samaria, which is the West Bank, is more important to them in terms of theology and biblical history than like what you would say the coast, the Tel Avivs, where they see the liberal bastions are. They want the West Bank. That's why there's this push on the West Bank for them, right? They're openly declared what they want. Smotrich said it. You have three options. You submit, you die, or you leave. Or you're expelled. Those are your three options, Palestinians. Okay? So when someone tells you that, are you going to say, let me hold up a sign? Are you going to say, let me appeal to the international community, which is blocked by the US, International Court of Justice? Let me establish an NGO and advocate and do a social media campaign? There's obviously Palestinians who commit themselves to a nonviolent orientation, and I support a diversity of tactics when it comes to Palestinian organizing. I mean, it's not like I'm engaging in military. My conduct is nonviolent. I engage in protests and stuff like that. But you would be crazy to tell Palestinians in the face of the most fascistic right-wing government, don't do anything back.
Right.
So Palestinians, what stands in between total annihilation for Palestinians by this government, this fascist government, what stands in between them and that is armed struggle for them as a people. Self-defense, right? And it's wild because I live in the state of Texas where there's more guns than people almost, okay? And people walk around with guns everywhere here, right? There's such a normalization of that in this state. And yeah, like when Palestinians, the notion that they may defend themselves, that they might fight back, that's already assumed off limits. And here's the thing, like occupation under international law established through the post-World War II era stipulates that occupied people have a right to resist through armed struggle.
Okay, yes. Occupying power. This is so important. I think that you constantly hear people saying, doesn't Israel have the right to defend itself? And the truth is that Palestinians are the ones with the right to defend themselves.
Absolutely.
Under international law.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No. Palestinians under international law have the right to defend themselves. But even if there was no international law, you're going to defend yourself if you're facing. But you're right. No, but if you're facing an existential context, right, where someone's telling you, I'm going to drive you out of your country, you're going to defend yourself, and you have a right to defend yourself. And I want to talk also to put into context, and this is me putting on my analyst hat, okay? Like, let me just analyze the situation. Not as an advocate or a promoter or anything like that. Let's look at the context. It's an asymmetrical context. You have a people who literally manufactures rockets in a ghetto, okay, with makeshift materials, including reusing the materials of bombs that were dropped on them by the Israelis, okay, whose rockets are indiscriminate. Nobody denies that. And in fact, one of the spokesperson for the resistance factions in Gaza once said, listen, y'all don't want us to fire rockets indiscriminately. We're with you. We want to be discriminate in where we fire our rockets. We want to target military sites. We want to target tanks and soldiers and stuff like that. Give us those weapons.
Right.
And we'll be happy to do it. Right. But right now, I'm manufacturing a weapon in a garage in a ghetto, right, with makeshift equipment and materials. That's what I'm doing. That's what's at my disposal. This rocket that 90% of which is intercepted, at the very least, it's a deterrence, right? Because it's an inconvenience for the people of Israel, right? It's an inconvenience. It's largely what it is. Obviously, people die from rockets. I'm not going to deny that. But at the very least, for Palestinians, this is what stands in our way. Kidnapping soldiers, which, in my estimation, what happened most recently in the last few days, I don't believe that, Hamas anticipated that it was going to be open the way it was. I think they anticipated meeting confrontation with Israeli military. I think their goals were probably to capture a few soldiers, to take them back, to exchange them for the thousands of Palestinian prisoners who exist in Israeli prisons, right? To engage in a prison swap. I think that was their goal. And so this goes back to for Palestinians, the only avenue for us to have our prisoners of war, these are prisoners of war, released, is to capture an Israeli prisoner, right? Israeli soldier.
Like what happened with
Gilad Shalit, Shalit, yeah. And so, like, you have to understand, 1,200 of the Palestinians of the 5,000 in prison haven't been charged with a crime.
Yeah.
They don't even know what they're accused of. They're just told you have to admit to what you did, and there's nothing to admit to. So for Palestinians, this is the asymmetric war. So for me, like what I tell people who support Palestine, there's some people who are like, I acknowledge that Palestinians are victims. I acknowledge they're living in an open prison. I acknowledge that they're under occupation. But that's the only way I could actually see them. If they do anything beyond that, it's off limits for me, right? And I tell you, okay, so you tell me as a Palestinian, what should we do? If you believe in the cause of Palestine, if you believe that Palestinians have a right to resist their occupation, you draw out the strategy for us. Write out the plan, please. Let us know what is the path that you think, if we followed as a people, will achieve our goals. And if the answer is, I don't have one, then what are you doing? You have these writers, so-called left-wing writers, say, oh, what if they just did this peaceful march, right? What if they had a Gandhi for them, right? As though that hasn't been tried. As though 2018 legs weren't being, Palestinians were systematically
I was just
disabled.
That.
Disfigured systematically, right? As though that hasn't already been tried. So what's reinforced to us, there's a wing of the progressive movement that can stomach Palestinians as victims, but nothing more than that, right? They can't stomach them as humans, both imperfect, who make mistakes, who engage in conduct that's excessive at times, right? Who are essentially a colonized population that are engaged in an anti-colonial struggle. They can't stomach that. Even though if you study any anti-colonial history, any anti-slave revolt, any actual rebellion against a violent system, it's only ever occurred through violence, right? And the ones that don't actually achieve their end goal, like if we were to take apartheid South Africa, this is what I want to say about apartheid South Africa, because they always tried to hold this up. Look, the ANC engaged in violence, this, and that. Well, go to South Africa today. South Africa is one of the most unequal societies. It's probably more similarly unequal as to what it was under apartheid. The Bantustan still exists. They're just shanty towns. They're essentially refugee camps of Black people. The white South Africans still control the majority of the land, still control the majority of the corporations. And that is what a compromise led to. That the South African population is still largely a victim of a repurposed system. One that instead of divides things black and white, now has allowed the entry of some Black people into an elite class, but still maintain the dominant order. That the haves, mainly whites, and the have-nots, right? So like these systems, and I think Zionism, because sometimes Zionism is framed, purely as like a land issue. Zionism is about the allocation of rights, resources, land, privileges to a certain group of people at the expense of the other, right? And that is true. That's why I think we need to understand, like when we say systems of oppression, it's the same. Anywhere you go, it's about the allocation of rights, resources, land. Who gets to have, who doesn't.
And this is, someone asked, Katie, please ask your guest to describe what happened during the 2018 peaceful protests, which you did a little bit, but anything else that you want to add in terms of?
No, it was called the Great March of Return, okay? Palestinians basically marched to the border with Gaza, the same border they broke through just the past few days, right? And they were sniped at. And here's the crucial thing, because like these people were not threats. They had no ability to actually breach the border fence, right? And they were systematically gunned down. Journalists, medics, teachers, children, all kinds of different people were systematically gunned down. And you go to Gaza right now, you see how many people walking around with missing limbs. You know, that's from the Great March of Return. That was the peaceful moment where they had kites and they had burning tires, and that was their form of resistance. And you know what the U.S. government did? Said nothing. You know what? Did Joseph Biden have a press conference when he talked about indiscriminate evil?
Right.
Did he talk about that? No. Did corporations, did the NBA and the NFL and all of these companies put out statements? Did they invite their Palestinian employees to express themselves? No. Because here's the thing, in the US, Palestinian life is not valued. It's not, we are so dehumanized. And I mean, this, I thought after May of 21, because I felt like there was a sea change. I was like, maybe people see us as humans now. I was optimistic. PYM, everyone, like the Palestinian rights movement in the US was like, wow, we're like seeing a sea change.
Because of what?
Because people were standing up for Palestine in ways that we had never seen before during May of 21. Okay. And it was because of Sheikh Jarrah and the neighborhoods. And, you know, the US was still like, instead of saying we support Israel, they were saying, you know, we want to de-escalate the situation. Right. We urge calm, whatever. So we're like, oh shit, things have gotten a little better for us here. This latest round reminded me that no. Fundamentally, we will be seen as non-humans, or human animals, as Yoav Gallant said. That's how we're seen.
Well, speaking of which, I want to share something, and I want your reaction to it, that to me captures perfectly the kind of liberal PEP, you know, progressive accept on Palestine, this PEP phenomenon, where people who consider themselves, I'm sure, liberal and tolerant and care about human life, that goes only so far. And the border for that is Palestinian. Yeah. So let's look at what this is. You can't make this up. Jamie Lee Curtis tweeted out a photo. I don't know if you saw this. So yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis tweets out this photo. It has a bunch of kids in it, and there's a child holding another child in his arms. He's looking up, and Jamie Lee Curtis posts this and writes "Terror from the skies," and then posts an Israeli flag. Now she thinks that these were Israeli children looking up at like rockets or something, right? She is informed that it's actually the following. It is actually a photograph of Palestinian families who seek refuge with their children from the northern Gaza Strip to UNRWA schools. That's United Nation Refugee
Works Association.
Yes. Okay. UNRWA schools inside Gaza City. Children are afraid of the sound of bombing, who hear it during their presence due to the events on the Strip's borders. So what does Jamie Lee Curtis do after she tweets this out, thinking they're Israeli children? She deletes it.
Right.
Because children have humanity if they're Israeli.
Right.
And they're afraid of rockets. But if they're Palestinians looking up in fear, I mean, she didn't even do a both sidesing of it. She couldn't even say something kind of that like took it out of that, like a false equivalence. She couldn't even do that. She had to just literally delete it.
Right. 100%. Yeah. No, I mean, and you can even see in the terms that the way people talk about it, right? Like it's even just in the framing, the amount of sympathy generated. It's not in any way comparable. First of all, it's disproportionate to the actual violence inflicted on people. Palestinians do not generate that kind of sympathy. Like, and under most circumstances, they do not. Okay, and so what does that tell you? What does that tell me? You know, living here,
you're worthless.
That I'm worthless. Yeah, it does. It really does communicate that to me and to my family and to my friends, right? And it's a product of Islamophobia for sure, anti-Arab racism, but there's a specific form of anti-Palestinianism that exists, right? That's distinct even, right? Because, Biden was like, we don't welcome hate, whether it's for Jews or Muslims. But they never even utter the word Palestinian.
Yeah.
Like they won't even be brought to say the word.
Yeah.
I
wanted to actually show a video. It's upsetting, but I kind of think it's important to show it, and people can not look if they want, but it's of a father holding his baby. And the reason I want to show it is because, people have been like very emotional on air, and I'm not belittling the violence that has happened, or I guess I should say I'm not belittling violence.
Right.
But we don't see people crying when they're Palestinians.
Right.
We don't see mainstream media people crying. Like John Kirby, we don't see him tear up when there are Palestinians killed. So I wanted to show this. And it's just a video that, we don't see Anderson Cooper interviewing this father. So if people don't want to watch it, it's sad. It's tragic. I mean, it's infuriating and it's tragic, but I think it's important precisely because this violence is being totally invisibilized. So this is a man in Gaza holding his baby who looks like she's sleeping, but she's actually dead. I don't know what he's saying.
He's saying she's one of the birds in heaven. She's now one of the birds in heaven. He's like, we are all for the sake of resistance. To let the whole world see. Small children. They've killed small children. He's like, let me show the world. He told him, show the world. He's like, we are all for the resistance. So despite that, they still feel the resistance. And this is what's important. Like, Palestinians in Gaza are sacrificing themselves, have sacrificed, and still are still understand that the role of resistance in their struggle. And our struggle is for them still worth the sacrifice, because it's the only thing that can actually ensure their future, right? Even when they are losing their children.
Yeah, and as I showed them, like, I can just imagine the people, they're going to be like, look how, they'll pathologize Palestinians. So it's going to be, oh, look how they care more about war than their kids or something.
Right.
Whereas if it were an Israeli, they wouldn't say that. They would say, look how horrible it is. Or look how brave they are. Just all these tropes. And it's so upsetting that you don't see that. Dana Bash did this thing. We talked about it the other day on Monday morning on Useful Idiots. And Dana Bash, she was very emotional. She showed bodies kind of blurred out, but I guess they were the bodies of the people who attended the rave. She mentioned a prayer, and I was just like blown away, because imagine, for a Palestinian, forget it, but like just a Muslim American anchor quoting something from Islam.
Right.
It would never happen. Like they would be fine. I mean, there'd be protests, boycotts. They'd be accused of, being theocrats or something.
Right,
and it's so disturbing, because I know, like, I just see how it's great for people to have empathy, but when the empathy is so selective and one-sided, you're just actually allowing the ethnic cleansing of people. It's not okay. It's not neutral. You're seeing one side of this conflict, the occupation, one side of the occupation as human and worthy victims, as Chomsky spoke about. And then, as you said before, everything is justified.
I mean, that's the point of it is to numb you to accept this reality. That's all it means. It's like, in order for you to accept it, you have to see these people as less than humans. It's in the same way that, for example, you could, for a person who's like that eats meat, like that isn't vegan, for example, or isn't
Right.
vegetarian. So you see someone like a factory that slaughters animals. If he doesn't feel like any sort of way towards that, then he can see that and watch that without any issue, right? It's the same concept here. If Palestinians are dehumanized to the point where they're pathologized, where they're rapists,
Right.
where they behead babies, where they are vile and crazed and evil, the embodiment of evil, right? Like this sort of description that takes place. I saw who used to be on The Rising, actually, Batya. She was on, I want to say, Fox, right?
Yeah, Fox.
The way the way Batya talks, it's unbelievable. And at the end of it, what is the goal of it is for people to not sympathize with the Palestinians, to see them as worthy of genocide, right? That if they're genocide, if you kill 2.3 million Palestinians, or you kill 100,000, if need be, then it makes sense. To the extent that you save 600 or 700 or 1,000 Israelis. Because what is unacceptable is that Israelis have died. Right. Not that Palestinians have been subjected to occupation and death. That's acceptable and the norm, and it's the status quo. It is calm. It is calm. Right. It is the reestablishment of calm. Okay? So status
quo, right, exactly, yeah.
I mean, but at the end of it, Katie, I think the Palestinian people, we've been at it for 75 years. We've been at it for 100 years because we faced off with the British, okay? And we have a very resilient people. We've created a culture of resilience, a culture of resistance, a culture of martyrdom, where we accept the fate that has been presented to us. Because at the end of it is, you want us gone, but we're not going to go away. And this is when we say apartheid, just to really quickly talk about this, and I'm sure you need to go to your other guests, but the framework of apartheid, for example, okay? Apartheid exists because the project of ethnic cleansing has been resisted, okay? You were unable to ethnically cleanse all of these people. And so you have to establish a system of racial governance over the ones who've remained.
Right.
Because hundreds of thousands, not millions of Palestinians live in Lebanon, right? In refugee camps. I was just there. I was just in Lebanon in August. The refugee camps are the worst slums you can imagine. They're ghettos. They're not the state, the Lebanese state, which discriminates against Palestinians, does not provide any support for them. It's actually under UNRWA, the same that is providing services in Gaza, right? These people they're barred from 27 jobs. They're not allowed to work in 27 jobs, engineering, lawyers, doctors in Lebanon. These are Palestinians who graduate from universities and then are unemployed. They're living in camps, right? These are the Palestinians that are from the north of Palestine. Then you have the Palestinians in Jordan, the Palestinians in Syria, who are now twice refugees. They were expelled from Palestine and now they're refugees from Syria. So this is the state of Palestinian. These Palestinians are outside of apartheid. The ones that remained are under it. But the end goal, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and I encourage your audience to look up a man by the name of Vladimir Jabotinsky. Okay, he's the ideological forefather of the Likud, of Netanyahu's party. Okay, he's the ideological forefather. And if you don't mind, Katie, I want to just read a quick quote from Jabotinsky,
who's one of the founders of Israel.
Right. And he represented, because at the time that Israel was founded, he represented the right wing, right? And the Labor Party, which fizzled out ironically enough, after October 73, the war in October 73, when they were surprised in the same way they were surprised recently, they no longer became relevant. They've never been relevant since. Well, the Likud and the right wing, this is what Jabotinsky was saying in 1922 in his seminal piece, The Iron Wall, okay, which describes their strategy vis-a-vis the Palestinians. He says, our peacemongers, he's referring to the labor Zionists, who want to come to an agreement, separation, two-state solution back then in the 20s. Our peacemongers are trying to persuade us that the Arabs are either fools whom we can deceive by masking our real aims, or that they are corrupt and can be bribed to abandon to us their claim to priority in Palestine, in return for cultural and economic advantages. I repudiate this conception of the Palestinian Arabs. Culturally, they are 500 years behind us. They have neither our endurance nor our determination, but they are just as good psychologists as we are. We may tell them whatever we like about the innocence of our aims, watering them down and sweetening them with honeyed words to make them palatable, but they know what we want as well as we know what they don't want. They feel at least the same instinctive jealous love of Palestine as the old Aztecs felt for the ancient Mexico and as the Sioux for their rolling prairies. This is how Jabotinsky, who described the project as a colonial project, talks about the Palestinians. Okay,
Right.
And his telling the labor, he's telling the labor Zionists, look, y'all can't. You telling this partition plan, you talking about this way, they know what we want. In fact, you know the Israeli flag, it has two blue stripes. Do you know what those blue stripes symbolize? The Nile and the Euphrates, right? The idea is that is greater Israel. So historically, up until recently, the Arabs, you know, historically the Palestinian cause was an Arab cause, like it wasn't just Palestinian.
Right.
Because they viewed Israel as a project of greater Israel. That the historic Israel, the kingdom of Israel, actually spanned from the Nile River to the Euphrates. So that includes all of Lebanon, includes parts of Iraq, Jordan, right? And the Ben Gavirs of the world, the Smotrists of the world, still believe this. They still believe this is their conception of Zionism. And so, for example, resistance, why Palestinians subscribe to resistance, is because they believe resistance is actually what's prevented the Greater Israel Project. It's the expulsion of Zionist forces from Lebanon at the hands of resistance that has prevented this Greater Israel Project, and that's kept these right-wing fanatics at bay. Now, there's a more pragmatist, liberal-minded, cosmopolitan, in touch with Western liberal values wing that has lost out a long time ago, that is no longer relevant and doesn't even register enough seats to be relevant in the Israeli parliament, right? Those are gone, the pragmatists. Now all we have is the right-wing ideologues, the right-wing opportunists, and the right-wing fanatics, right? The ideologues who think about things not just in religious terms, right? The opportunists like Netanyahu, who's a criminal and doesn't want to end up in prison, and the messianic ones, the ones who are on the hilltops in the West Bank, who see Arabs as slaves. Those are the three wings now of the Israeli government. And they've entered into an unholy alliance. And Netanyahu, because of the opportunist he is, needs to ride them because he knows no one else will give him what he wants. And Netanyahu doesn't have an off-ramp. He doesn't have an off-ramp around the Israeli reforms, the Supreme Court. He doesn't have an off-ramp from this war because he's already lost. The failure has lost. So that's what scares me, is when you don't have an off-ramp, the only path forward is genocide for you, because that's the only way, theoretically, you can redeem yourself in the face of Israeli society in front of the Israeli public, is you have to butcher Palestinians. You have to expel the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip, because that's what. And the Smotriches and the Ben Gavirs of the world are sitting back applauding. They're so excited for their opportunity to carry out another Nakba. So,
do you think, no, this is great. Do you think that they would just flatten, like level Gaza, even if that meant killing the Israelis?
Well, so here's what I think. Okay, and I'm not one to predict because we don't know where this is going to go. First of all, and I think Miko was talking, I caught the tail end of it, is Israelis, in terms of ground invasion, it hasn't gone well for them recently, right, historically. And it's actually not their experience with Palestinians that have given them that. It's their experience with the Lebanese resistance, right. Okay? When they barely could advance 3 kilometers into Lebanon in 2006, they had this. I encourage everyone to read this, and I encourage you, Katie, to read it. There's an article, an assessment, actually made by a pro-Israeli military official in the U.S. It's called "We Were Caught Unprepared," okay, which does an actual assessment of IDF's capabilities and their strategies in 2006 war in Lebanon. Okay, basically the assessment is they're used to dealing with militias. Okay, and by militias, there's a difference between trained fighters and militias. Militias is like you see a couple guys on the street, they need to defend that area, you give them some guns. Those are militias. They don't have any formal training. They don't have any structure, like actual military structure. They don't have any discipline. They don't know how they don't have any communications apparatuses. They're just guys with guns. Okay, they're used to dealing with guys with guns. That's what the Israelis are used to dealing with. In the West Bank, when they go into Jenin, now obviously this is advanced. The resistance in the West Bank is advanced, but historically they just go in, they do what they want, they leave unscathed, or maybe one of them gets shot. You know, Gaza is not like that anymore for them. Gaza has a city underneath the city. They have a tunnel network. Okay, they've assassinated 2 figures of Hamas in this last 3 days. Of all this bombardment, of the thousands of missiles they've launched, 2 Hamas leaders have been assassinated. Okay, what that tells you is they're not going to be able to decapitate the head of Hamas from the skies, so they have to go into the ground. And when they go into the ground, a society that is very sensitive to the loss of soldier life is not going to be able to withstand a face-to-face combat, because what's going to happen is, first of all, it's booby-trapped. Hamas initiated this war, not Israel, so they've prepared for an invasion. So that means then there's a trap set. And right now, this is why there's a delay. In 2006, you know, they invaded immediately, and they suffered losses immediately. They haven't. It's been 3 days they haven't invaded. They're like still gathering up troops, which is shocking. And before, this would have never happened. Before, it would have just been bombardment from the skies. But right now, the bombardment it's diminishing returns. Over time, you can only drop so many rockets and kill so many civilians before you haven't accomplished your political goal, or the goal of the war, which is what they've stated, to eliminate Hamas. So they have to go into the ground. That's not going to be a fun battle. That's not going to be a fun fight for them. They're going to lose a lot of soldiers, and it's going to be slow moving, and it's a territory that's not their territory, a territory controlled by the other side that knows the intricacies of the neighborhoods, the underground tunnels, knows where the traps are, and has set up a system that would allow them to repel people. So I think it's going to be, if they invade, it's going to be long drawn out. And here's the problem for them. If they invade, they still have the resistance in Lebanon to contend with. And that's the worst case scenario for them, is the Lebanese resistance to come into this picture. Because the Lebanese resistance's capabilities, its number of soldiers, its rockets, is multitude more advanced than what exists in Gaza. And that's the worst case scenario for Israel. And that's why the US docked a warship outside of Lebanon in the Mediterranean, because they want to try to deter them. But we've seen back and forth with Israel and Lebanon recently in the last few days. And this is just testing the water, right? Like, this is just about, but it's Hezbollah telling the Israelis, we're here and present, so be careful how you do it. And I don't think the resistance in Lebanon will let Hamas be destroyed. I don't think they will without entering. And they've signaled that they won't let them. So this is where we're ending up. The only way out of this, in my opinion, is a negotiation. Now, if the Israeli society is willing, after what's happened, to do that, it will get it done. But that's my fear, that Netanyahu, if he off-ramps to a negotiation, that means his government's done. His coalition is done. And he's in prison. That's what's at risk here. That's what's at stake here. And that's why it's really dangerous a moment. And then, you know, the potential for a regional war with Iran and the Iraqi militias and all of this other stuff. I won't even get into that, but that's also a possible reality for us.
Well, Brad, who works the producer of the show, wanted to know if he thought if Israel chose to level Gaza, thereby knowingly killing many Israeli citizens with Israeli bombs, whether you think that would happen. If it did, what the consequences would be.
It's hard to say right now. Like, they've signaled that they don't care about the lives of the prisoners of war.
Right, which is crazy, because they love to pretend that that's all they care about, right? They never leave anyone behind, even corpses.
Right. And so I think that's bluffing. Like, I do think that I don't think Israeli society can forgive a Netanyahu-led government for killing captives. right? Because here's the thing, even with Gilad Shalit, you know, like this one prisoner, his family was able to create so much pressure on the Israeli government, right? And this is true of the other, because before this war broke out, Hamas has a few prisoners, has 3 or 4 of Israeli soldiers. And there was one that wandered into Gaza, I believe, an Israeli man, but I don't remember the specifics of it. I don't know that they would level Gaza at the expense of these people. So I think there's a diminishing returns. They've been telling us they're going to invade any moment now for the last 48 hours. I do expect them to. I actually don't want to say that I expect them to invade. I don't know what to expect right now. I think right now they're just generating consent, and I think the world, the international community will turn really quickly back on Israel. Not because I think they care about Palestinians, but they can't have an outbreak of a regional war with Ukraine and Russia. Like the U.S. is kind of stuck right now, and then you have the pivot to Taiwan and China, like all of these things, and this might give you a sense of why Hamas decided to do what it did in this moment, right? If you pay attention to what's been happening the last 3 years with the West Bank, with the South, with the establishment of tents in the Sheba farms by the resistance in Lebanon, right? If you follow these things, these are all a negotiation around the gas fields in the Mediterranean between Lebanon and Israel, in which Hezbollah threatened to attack the gas fields, the actual extractors of the explorers and extractors of gas off the coast of Palestine. That all couldn't and wouldn't exist if there wasn't a war in Russia and Ukraine. Why? Because first of all, Israel needs to extract that gas for European consumption, right? There's a pressure around that. The second is, right now the U.S. has funneled all of its weapons, all of its money into supplying this war, a non-ending war. So right now, they're going to be forced to pick. Do we back an extended long-term war that might become a regional war in the Middle East, or do we still focus on Russia and Ukraine? And wait a minute, we still got Taiwan and China. This multipolarity that exists, that's opening up, is creating more limited choices for Western powers. And that includes Israel, because ultimately Israel is an outpost for the West. That's what it is. That's all it is. And here's what I tell people. Like, you know, the U.S. always talks in this, like, this is this propaganda of shared values, right? Shared history and the only democracy in the Middle East. I believe genuinely that if Israel didn't serve the United States in the region, if it wasn't an asset, they would not think twice about Israel. And that includes Jewish people. Because truthfully, the history of Western civilization's relationship to Jewish people has been of one of, if not apathy, like indifference, contempt. That's been its history, right? And so right now, you see this because the people who closed their borders on Jewish refugees during the Holocaust was this country, was the West, was the British. These were the people who closed their borders and told them go to Palestine, right? And so these people, it's opportunistic. It's in the same way that the Ukrainian lives are now being opportunistically expended. And that's what's so sad about this country that talks in terms of, oh, good and evil. This is what the U.S. is about, yada, yada. No, the U.S. is about using all of these oppressed people. Because at the end of the day, these people are oppressed in service of whether it's the Kurds in the region, like the Kurdish people, when they're used by the U.S. to capture oil fields in Syria, right? And then the moment that ISIS is on their door, they kind of say, wait a minute, like, I don't know if we want to expend this sort of energy, or the moment that it doesn't become convenient, they drop chip. That's how the U.S. works with these people, with these minority groups. So and here's like, just to touch on this last question around like, and this is why I think the path forward for Jewish people around anti-Semitism is the struggle against anti-Semitism must be an internationalized struggle, must be a solidarity struggle. It must be a struggle against anti-Muslim, anti-Black, and it has to be internationalized, right? The siege mentality that exists, that's been generated by Zionism as a politics, is about the West.
Yes.
Because a military outpost requires a siege mentality.
Right.
And you, like, imagine being the president of the United States telling Jewish people in this country you're not safe. What does that mean here? That's an abdication of your responsibility to protect your citizens within your country. That you need to have a perpetual state somewhere else in the event that you fail to protect them.
Right.
Instead, it should be Jewish people should be protected everywhere they are. Right? And they, not just Jewish people, everyone should be protected wherever they are. So, I mean, like, I think this is the principles that undergird the Palestinian struggle, but progressive struggle more generally. I'm not saying that Palestinian society is progressive or Palestinian resistance factions are progressive. I'm saying the struggle for Palestine is progressive. In the same way the struggle against anti-Semitism is progressive and should be progressive. In the same way, you could spell it out.
All right. Well, you know what? To speaking of the argument you just made about how this is really about what Western domination, or how Israel is really utilized. It's not about standing with persecuted people or preventing another Holocaust, right? Here's Joe Biden kind of admitting that in, I believe, 1984.
Time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel. The second part is people.
So
this is an excellent clip.
Yeah. Yeah. So he agrees with you.
No, it is. It's because, that's the same reason that the U.S. supports Saudi Arabia. It's the same reason, it's the same reason that Taiwan is propped up. It's the same reason the Ukraine is supported. Like, it's all just, they're proxies ultimately for the U.S.
Yeah.
And here's, I think Zionism as a project was so, it arose out of a moment of Western anti-Semitism. Some people try to trace Zionism to the Holocaust, but it obviously predates the Holocaust by 50, 60, 70 years, right? It was in response to anti-Semitism in the West. But in fact, it was a product of three trends: anti-Semitism, colonialism as the method, and nationalism as the ontology, like the character. We need to create a nation through colonization to respond to anti-Semitism. That is the emergence of historical trends that produced the Zionist movement. Right. But historically, Jewish people said there were different currents that answered, right?
Right. There was a huge anti-Zionist Jewish tradition.
Right, that revolved around internationalism,
right,
socialism, communism. Our response to fascism is solidarity. Our response to fascism is working class struggle.
Right.
That was the dominant response. Now, many of those people and many of those movements were genocided by the Nazi regime.
Yeah.
Right. And Zionism basically came to dominate out of the Holocaust. It came out of that moment, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, Zionism as a project of colonialism, as a colonial project, concentrated Jewish people in an area that required an ethnic cleansing of another people, which rendered Jewish people perpetually unsafe. That to me is the fundamental historical mistake, if you can call it one, of Zionism.
It doesn't keep, the irony is it's not good for Jews either.
Yeah, it's not good for Jews either. No, it's not. It's not. It's not good for Jews in a number of different ways. The destruction of diaspora communities and diaspora culture, of Yiddish, of the cultural life, of the richness and depth of Sephardic Judaism, of Arabic Judaism, of all of these different trends of Ashkenazi Judaism, right? The depth and history of French Jews, of British Jews, of Moroccan and Yemeni Jews, of their food, of their culture and custom, and through the creation of an artificial country that sought to make a new shared language of Hebrew, right? Like resurrecting it from the dead, right? A nationality that is taking from this area and that area, right? That has really historically no depth. The depth that exists within Israeli culture is Jewish culture from wherever they came, right? Morocco, Yemen, Iraq, and there's a lot of history to go through, honestly. And you're letting me speak for a long time, so I hope I'm not taking up a lot of your time.
Yeah. Well, and you have to come back because this is great.
Yeah.
We should do a whole thing about this history. It's so fascinating. But any final words?
First of all, I thank you, Katie, for,
of course.
Like I told you, I've been a fan of your
you.
show, and ever since you were on the Rising and you took that principled stance in support of Palestine, and really grateful for you to have done that. And I encourage your followers and your supporters to continue to speak in support of the Palestinian struggle and emphasize and insist on the context that is the history of occupation, and see Palestine as a litmus test, because it's not about us, it's about what it means for everyone else.
Right.
And like I said, it's a canary in a coal mine. The moment the canary dies in a coal mine, the Palestinian case dies, know that everything else is expendable. Yeah,
and you see that with censorship, for instance, all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Please come back on, and we will see you soon. And thanks for all your work, all the work that you do.
Of course. Happy to be on anytime. Thank you so much.
Bye, Mohammed. Okay, guys. So we decided, because of the tech issue and the delay, we are going to talk to Norman Finkelstein next Tuesday. But I know Norman would really have appreciated our chat with Mohammed, so I'm sure he co-signs that. Brad was in the wings. Brad was negotiating with Norm because sorting out the bedtime and all that. But I hope you guys, I've had Norm on before. I will have him on again. We had him on Useful Idiots a couple weeks ago, and I'm very excited that we spoke with Mohammed, because we've never had him on the show, and I haven't seen him on any other shows, and I think he had an amazing perspective, and I really love the way he didn't just analyze Israel, Palestine, but he connected it to the war in Ukraine. So, all right. Here's the thing. Norm is coming next week. So come back next week. Also on Useful Idiots, because of the time difference, it's hard for me to speak to people who are in Palestine right now. So make sure you tune into Useful Idiots, because we're going to be talking to some people who are in Palestine. And thank you for coming to this. And I will see you next week. And thank you so much, Brad, Tyler, and Phantom Esfanta for the clips. And again, for being here and share the stream, because it was so important. And I think people really need to hear, especially given that Mohammed was one of the organizers of this protest that the squad ran from in a kind of cowardly way. So make sure we'll clip it, as we always do, but make sure you share this, because people need to hear what was really behind that protest. Okay. Bye, everyone. If you can support the show at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. We always love that. Patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And of course, a way to spread the word is just share this and subscribe by hitting subscribe and then pressing the bell and then liking it. Okay. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Okay,